No one would have expected the hushed secrets whispered under the moonlight in King's Landing's godswood to threaten the entire 7 kingdoms. The hour was late, and the trees swayed gently under a pale glow, their leaves rustling like anxious voices in a sacred hush. Eddard Starkned to his friends came to the godswood with a single purpose: to find the truth. He had believed, like his friend Robert Baratheon, that the worst of his troubles lay far behind him in the rebellious days of overthrowing the Targaryens. He had believed that the realm, however unsteady, was still stable enough to endure small lies. But now, rumors ran wild in the Red Keep, and every one of those quiet speculations pointed to a greater betrayal. Ned walked deeper into the glade, the small heart tree's white bark almost luminescent. He knelt, gently pressing his palm against the tree's face carved long ago, in a manner reminiscent of the northern tradition. The old gods neither spoke nor offered comfort, but Ned felt the watchful presence of something older than any king. He waited there, fully armed but weighed down with dread. Each breath felt like it carried shards of ice that lacerated his lungs. He gazed around, looking for Cersei Lannister, the queen. She had asked to speak to him. The soft murmur of the wind felt ominous, and as she stepped into view, her green eyes caught the moonlight. They were not friendly eyes. They were fierce, glittering with equal parts challenge and contempt. Yet she wore a polite smile, the trained mask of a ruler's consort. There, under the silent boughs, they had an exchange of words that changed the future of Westeros forever. "I know your secret," Ned had said, voice low, laced with quiet conviction. Cersei's regal poise faltered momentarily. She understood Ned was not the type to hurl baseless accusations. She turned sideways, letting the pale moon reflect on golden hair that was far too similar to that of her brother Jaime and nothing like King Robert's black. The queen's voice was calm, but her words had fangs. "If you know what is good for you and your daughters, Lord Stark, you will forget this secret." Ned's heart pounded, but he maintained the typical northern stoicism that had served him in war and in duty. Yet that mask could not fully contain the swirl of emotions beneath. He had discovered something from the late Jon Arryn's notes and from his own quiet investigations. Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen royal children in name only were not Robert's. Instead, they carried the proud Lannister lineage in their blood. Cersei took a step closer. "You warned me to flee. But who are you, Ned Stark, to question my children's parentage?" Ned stood, a man who loved Robert well enough to protect him from your treason. A beat passed. Ned half expected her to strike or to command the guards who surely waited nearby to appear and silence him. Instead, she pressed her lips into a bitter line. "A pity," she said. "A pity you cannot see that your sense of honor will destroy you and your family." She turned on her heel and left the godswood, her farewell as cold and cutting as the winter wind. Ned remained, breathing the heavy scents of earth and water, uncertain how long he stood transfixed by the gloom. The air itself felt alive, as if the ancient trees witnessed a crime in the making. From that moment, he knew everything had changed. His illusions that King's Landing could be navigated through quiet dignity and righteous truth alone were dashed. He felt the old gods' silent witnessing. Perhaps they mourned for him already. Ned returned from the godswood, with a dread curling in the pit of his stomach. The tower of the Handy's official residence appeared imposing by night, but he was accustomed to looming stone, having grown up in the monolithic heaps of Winterfell. He trudged inside, and as always, he was greeted by the drip of distant torches and the hush of corridors that seemed infinitely long. He summoned Petter Baelish, Littlefinger, to his private solar. With each passing hour, the realization grew that he needed not just swords, but cunning. This city abounded with cunning, most of it dangerous. Lord Stark, said Littlefinger, slipping into the solar as if he had always belonged there. He wore a mild grin that rarely touched his eyes. I trust your late hour's summons is urgent. A man needs a good reason to forego his sleep in King's Landing, don't you agree? Ned sat behind a wide wooden table, the flicker of candlelight making the scars from his battles appear deeper. I need men, he said. I need eyes and ears, as well as steel. Littlefinger arched a slim eyebrow. We have the city watch. We have gold cloaks. Is my lord planning to replace them so soon? I am not a fool, Petter, Ned replied. The gold cloaks swear loyalty to the king, but we both know their loyalty can be purchased with gold. Petter's sly grin grew. Cynical, but not inaccurate. He folded his hands. What do you require exactly? Ned took a steadying breath. I need men loyal to sellswords or hedge knights you can vouch for. And I need a maester, not Pycelle. At that, Petter carefully schooled his features. A second maester? Quite a request. One might interpret that as a sign of mistrust in the Grand Maester, or in the Queen. Ned's mouth tightened. Is that a problem? I know where to find certain individuals. Littlefinger's tone turned coolly professional. They are not cheaply bought, but they are discreet provided you pay them well. A maester, though, that's trickier. I have housemen in the north who might be able to help, Ned said, thoughtful. But time is short. As if sensing Ned's desperation, Littlefinger let slip the hint of a cat-like smile. Pay me enough, and I'll conjure miracles. Ned gave him a long, measured look. I will pay what is needed, but know this, I won't be your puppet, Baelish. Littlefinger offered a half bow. Nor would I want you to be. No one can truly puppet the man who raised the boy now ruling the north. He twirled a ring on his finger. Rest assured, I will see this done. It was late when Littlefinger departed, leaving Ned alone with his tumultuous thoughts. A single candle flickered, its pale glow revealing maps of the 7 kingdoms and old letters from Winterfell. The shadows pressed close, an oppressive reminder of the city's labyrinth of secrets. In the hush of the night, he penned a letter to Stannis Baratheon on Dragonstone. Of Robert's 2 brothers, Renly was pleasant, sociable, and dangerously ambitious. Stannis, though humorless and rigid, was the elder brother, and so the rightful heir after Robert Teef's such claims came to matter. Ned's instinct told him Stannis also suspected the truth about the royal children's parentage, ever since Jon Arryn's suspicious death. He sealed the letter with the direwolf sigil, and entrusted it not to the Red Keep's ravens, but to a trusted guardsman of Winterfell, who was quietly loyal. Ned gave explicit instructions for a slow, careful journey to Dragonstone, avoiding any route that might be watched by Lannister eyes. At times, Ned's own sense of honor warred with his unaccustomed need for secrecy. This city forced even the most righteous to adopt cunning if they wished to survive. That night, he dreamed of Wolf's Wood and Winterfell's silvery frost on pine needles, the hush of snow underfoot. He dreamed of the murmuring weirwoods. He awoke drenched in sweat to the brazen calls of the dawn watch. Even in slumber, there was no rest from the choking tension of King's Landing. During the subsequent days, life in King's Landing pretended a semblance of normalcy. Courtiers strutted and whispered. Gold cloaks guarded the walls, and the people scoured the markets for morsels of meat or bread. Ned's heart, however, pounded with each new rumor. Word reached him that Robert had ridden off to the Kingswood on a boar hunt, a pastime that should have been harmless, though in truth it had become deadly for king after king. Time dragged. Ned, from the Tower of the Hand, busied himself with affairs of the realm. Petter Baelish brought him 6 men, sellswords, each with weathered faces telling of long roads and harder battles. They were neither clean nor gallant, but they knew how to fight and, more importantly, could be paid to keep their mouths shut. In time, a man in gray robes also arrived, accompanied by Baelish. His chain bore links of brass, iron, tin, and silver, though no gold, possibly indicating a variety of expertise but not the highest rank. He introduced himself as Maester Riker, once assigned to a lesser household in the Reach. He had parted ways with that house under circumstances that Baelish chose not to elaborate on. The man bowed stiffly, pledged his service, and went about occupying one of the smaller chambers near Ned's solar. A few more nights passed, and Ned's tension grew. Whispers arrived of bandits rampaging the Riverlands, the banners of the rearing stallion, House Bracken, and the Tullyfish possibly entangled in new conflicts. Yet it was the name Gregor Clegane that repeated on the lips of terrified refugees the mountain that rides, a monstrous figure rumored to be the Lannisters' dog of war. Ned tried to contain his alarm. If Tywin Lannister was behind these raids, it spelled open hostility. If King Robert lay abed in a drunken haze, or worse, mortally wounded by a boar's tusk, the realm would break like a rotted hull on a storm-lashed coast. Finally, on a night of uneasy quiet, a weary, dust-covered guard returned to the Tower of the Hand with urgent news. The king's hunting party had been sighted at the mud gate. They had come under cloak of darkness, discreetly. Stranger yet, the king was carried on a litter, as if gravely wounded. Ned's heart twisted. This was the same dread scenario he had feared from the start. "Hurry," he told Maester Riker, his personal guard and the half-dozen sellswords. "We go to the Red Keep." They hurried through the labyrinth of corridors and up the winding stair to the royal chambers. Outside, the gold cloaks tried to impede them, but with Ned brandishing the hand's seal and the sellswords glowering, they parted ways. Inside the king's chamber, the smell of blood was immediate and thick. Robert Baratheon lay on the bed, sweat gleaming on his broad, flushed. The once imposing king who had shattered princes on the battlefield was pale, his breath coming in pained rasps. A wide bandage across his torso was soaked through with deep crimson stains. Cersei stood near, her expression both concerned and quietly furious as she spied Ned. Pycelle hovered with bottles and vials in hand, though he looked more anxious than helpful. Ned did not hesitate. "Maester Riker," he ordered, "see to the king." Even as Cersei hissed a protest, Robert raised a trembling hand. "Let him work," he rasped, voice still bearing the faint rumble of command that had rallied armies. Then Robert's gaze flicked to Ned, and a flicker of relief lit his tired eyes. "Ned," he managed, "missed you out in the hunt." Ned approached the bed, clasped Robert's hand. He saw the wounded, angry gash from the boar's tusk, deep enough that he could nearly see muscle. "A damned beast," Robert muttered. "Slipped the spear, caught me in the side." Ned's jaw tightened as he watched Riker remove bloodied bandages and begin cleaning the wound with a herbal poultice. Each swipe caused Robert to groan and grimace, but he did not flinch. The king had survived countless skirmishes, but the boar's gore told a different tale. Pycelle hovered. "I must object," he began in a quavering voice, but Robert cut him off with a glare. "Object to what?" The king growled. "My own hand bringing his own maester to fix me. Let the man do his job, Pycelle." Cersei's eyes burned like emerald fire, but she curbed her tongue. Even she sensed the precariousness of the king's life. The tension in the room was a physical thing, nearly choking. Carefully, skillfully, Riker applied fresh bandages, poured certain decoctions of herbs, and used a potent analgesic to calm Robert's trembling. "It is deep, Your Grace, but it can mend if we keep infection at bay. You must rest, absolutely rest." The king gave a half laugh. "You expect me to dance?" Soon, Robert slipped into a drugged sleep. Ned watched for a long while, standing guard. Cersei departed, leaving behind an aura of hostility. Pycelle reluctantly withdrew with her, and Ned was alone except for Ricker's patient ministrations and the staccato breathing of his oldest friend. No one dared approach them for hours. The hush stretched, broken only by the occasional moan from Robert, or Riker's whispered instruction. In the corridor beyond, the Lannister guards paced, uncertain. When dawn broke, Robert stirred and recognized Ned. "My friend," he murmured, "you saved my life, or so it seems. This new maester of yours has a gentler hand than Pycelle's." Ned managed a tight smile. "I only want what is best for the realm." Robert's expression, though pale, hardened with old determination. "I fear the realm is in grave danger, and not just from boars." He tried to rise, wincing at a spasm of pain. "But that damned thing has not killed me yet." Despite all the worry, Ned felt something akin to hope flutter in his chest. A fortnight passed. The king clung tenaciously to life, improving bit by painstaking bit. Initially, he was too weak to stand. Then, with Riker's careful treatments a regimen of antiseptic salves, heated compresses, and daily changes of bandages, Robert regained enough strength to leave his bed for short intervals. Cersei wore a veneer of dutiful concern, but her eyes glittered with anger whenever she saw Ned. The tension between them was palpable. Rumors spread through the corridors that the Queen and the Hand were vying for control of the city. Meanwhile, Joffrey strutted about with the Hound at his flank, perpetually annoyed that he could not claim the throne as regent. Ned was certain that Cersei had no intention of surrendering anything. He prepared for the worst, ensuring his new guards remained close, that the gates and the city watch were quietly observed by men loyal to him. His daughters, Sansa and Arya, were kept under near-constant watch, though Arya bristled at that. Ned had lost one child before. He could not bear the thought of danger befalling them here in this viper's nest. Then came the day impossible. Hopeful when Robert rose from bed under his own power, leaning heavily on a crutch, but determined. Rumors swirled that he meant to appear in the throne room. Cersei must have heard as well, for her face grew tight with ill-concealed fury. Word spread. A gathering was called in the great hall of the Red Keep. Lords, ladies, knights, and courtiers pressed in, forming a hushed mass of richly colored silks and battered leathers, their expressions uncertain. On one side stood Joffrey with his golden hair, accompanied by Queen Cersei and some members of the Kingsguard in pristine white cloaks. On the other side stood Ned, flanked by men wearing the direwolf of House Stark. Over 100 gold cloaks ringed the hall, their commander looking toward the dais with restless eyes. The hush deepened when Robert's approach was signaled by the trumpets. He entered slowly, leaning on that crutch and wearing a black and gold tunic that bore the proud stag. He had lost weight during his convalescence, and his face bore lines of pain, but his eyes flashed with the old Robert's leonine ferocity. He scanned the throng, and a hush fell over courtiers who had grown too used to the notion that King Robert might die. "Why," he said, voice echoing in the vaulted space, "do I come here to see you arrayed against my hand?" Immediately, the gold cloaks dropped to one knee. Their captain nearly stumbled in fear. Cersei stepped forward, chin lifted regally. "Your Grace, we have only been defending your children from those who would harm them." Her emerald gaze flicked to Ned, the implication clear. A low growl rumbled in Robert's throat. "My children," he said bitterly. "Or are they?" A wave of murmurs rippled through the onlookers. Cersei's mask of composure faltered for the briefest moment, replaced by a flash of panic. Joffrey's mouth fell open, red blotches rising on his pale cheeks. Even Sansa, in the crowd with Arya, clasped her hands to her mouth, uncertain what was happening. Robert seized the momentum. "I have been a blind, fool-blind these many years, but no longer. He moved forward as though the throne itself called to him. The watchers parted to let him pass until he stood at the base of the Iron Throne, its metal swords twisting and forming that ancient seat. He turned, brandishing the head of his cane like a weapon. "You would set the gold cloaks on my hand, the man who saved my life?" His gaze flicked to the City Watch commander. "Is that your wish, or do you serve me?" The gold cloaks found themselves pinned under the king's glare and quickly bowed. "We serve the king," their commander said, trembling. A flicker of triumph danced in Cersei's eyes, as if she planned to twist the scenario in her favor. "My beloved husband, you have been unwell." Silence. The single word from Robert boomed across the hall. Cersei's cheeks flamed red. She inhaled, nostrils flaring. Robert turned to Ned. "Speak your piece, Ned. Tell them all what you told me." Ned felt the dryness in his throat, but he raised his voice with firm resolve. "Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen Baratheon are not the true-born children of King Robert. They are the offspring of Queen Cersei Lannister and her brothers, Jaime Lannister." A collective gasp rose, followed by an explosion of chatter. Some tried to cry out, "Treason!" Others simply stared, stricken. Joffrey's eyes bulged. He looked to his mother, face turning purple. "It's a lie!" the boy screeched. "He's lying, Mother." Cersei did not deny it outright. Instead, she turned to the crowd with all the pride of a cornered lioness. "I have done only what I must to protect my family." Robert's face contorted, equal parts fury and heartbreak. "Is that your defense?" he roared. "You gave me children who weren't mine. You defied the laws of gods and men." He mounted 2 steps of the dais, grip on his cane trembling with anger. "White cloaks!" he barked at the Kingsguard. "Seize the queen, Joffrey too. I want them held in their chambers until I decide what to do with them." A heartbeat of hesitation long enough for the crowd to wonder if the Kingsguard would obey. Then Sir Barristan Selmy Barristan the Bold stepped forward. The older knight's face was carved from stone, but he would not ignore his king's command. With measured dignity, he signaled to the others, Sir Meryn and Sir Preston. They moved in. Joffrey wailed curses, and Cersei's eyes flared. "You forget," she spat, "who my father is. Tywin Lannister will not suffer this insult." Robert shot back. "Then Tywin Lannister will face the might of the crown." The gold cloaks parted as Cersei, Joffrey, and the younger children, who had been hurried into the hall by Cersei's orders, were led away under guard. Tommen looked small and frightened, Myrcella pale with wide eyes brimming with tears. Joffrey's shrill protests echoed against the high stone walls, but Barristan's white cloak never wavered. It was the single most shocking event King's Landing had witnessed in a generation. A king, once believed to be on his deathbed, had roared back, dethroning his queen and invalidating his supposed heirs in front of the entire realm. When the last of them were gone, Robert found himself at the foot of the Iron Throne, his rightful seat. He turned slowly, letting the hush wash over the assembly. Henceforth, he declared, "Any man or woman who keeps secrets from this crown, or conspires against the rightful king, is a traitor. Do not think these laws are idle." Ned felt an uneasy tremor as the crowd whispered. He realized that King's Landing, and indeed all Westeros, was perched on a precipice. A single push could send them all cascading into war and ruin. But at least the truth was out. Within days, ravens carried the shocking news to every corner of the Seven Kingdoms. Robert Baratheon was alive. Cersei Lannister and her children were incarcerated. Whispers of incest and false heirs spread like wildfire. In the wake of the revelations, many lords faced sudden choices of loyalty. Some believed Robert's accusations to be the rantings of a wounded king, manipulated by House Stark. Others recalled old rumors about the closeness of Jaime and Cersei. Still others kept silent, waiting to see which way the wind would blow. Lord Tywin Lannister, upon receiving news of his daughter's imprisonment, marched his host out of the Westerlands. Rumors told that he split his forces, half under his personal command moving eastward, the rest under Jaime Lannister's leadership heading toward the Riverlands. Riverrun was threatened. The Red Fork was ablaze with Gregor Clegane's pillaging. Robert refused to stand idle. Summoning what strength he had recovered, he rallied men from the Crownlands and Stormlands. Though still pale and occasionally wincing from his wound, he mounted a charger and took personal command of his army. "I was a fool to play at hunts," he told Ned as they parted in the courtyard of the Red Keep. "But war no war. Tywin Lannister wants to test my wrath. He'll have it." Ned had pleaded for caution. "Let me go in your stead, your grace. You're still recovering." But Robert only grinned, wincing slightly as he swung onto the saddle. "They say a good hammer blow from me can still ring a man's helm like a bell. Don't worry, I won't do anything too reckless." Bearstan Selmy rode at his side, along with several more loyal knights. The rest of the King's Guard, including the Hound, was scattered on various missions to secure the crown's interest. Sir Sandor Clegane had no love for his brother Gregor, and gladly took part in the campaign. Meanwhile, Renly Baratheon emerged from a side corridor, impeccably dressed and flamboyantly confident. "Brother, I'll accompany you. It's high time I see some real battle." Robert snorted. "Stay behind if you must, or come, but do not think war is a game. This is no tourney." Renly's grin flickered, but he bowed. At the last moment, the king clasped Ned's hand. "Keep the city, Ned. Keep my seat warm. If the Lannisters try their slyness here, remind them that the king still rules." Ned nodded. He was certain that challenges would arise soon enough. Within hours, the king's host departed the city in a thunder of hooves, banners snapping in the wind. The crowned stag of Baratheon, the white cloak of the King's Guard, and smaller houses sworn to the Stormlands or the Crownlands. The city gates groaned shut behind them. Ned Stark turned back to the Red Keep, the seat of power that had all but devoured men greater than himself. He knew his responsibilities were immense. The city teemed with spies, cutthroats, and those uncertain how to survive the swiftly shifting political tides. Yet it was not only the Lannisters who concerned him. Word arrived from the east that Daenerys Targaryenons targeted for assassination yet lived. Robert's shift in perspective during his convalescence had ended the threat on her life, but no one knew what that might mean for the Targaryen princess or her Dothraki horse lord. Ned could only wonder if the Targaryens might see the unraveling in King's Landing as a chance to return. A swirl of half-finished thoughts plagued him. He passed the black cells where Joffrey and Cersei were kept under guard. Myrcella and Tommen, being younger and less culpable, were given comfortable chambers, though locked. No official punishment had been decreed. Robert presumably wanted to confront Tywin Lannister before making that decision. Ned could not forget the vulnerability of these imprisoned children. They were not his own, and they were certainly no heirs of Robert's, but they were still children. He had no desire to see them harmed, so he placed men he trusted to guard them, to ensure no Lannister ploy or vengeful courtier could exploit the situation. Outside the city, the realm's rivers churned with blood. Gregor Clegane's savage raids had ignited chaos across the Riverlands. The Tullys scrambled, and word came that Cat Ned's wife was fiercely engaged in a war of her own, sending young Robb Stark to gather the northern lords. Ned prayed for them daily, knowing if the tide of war spread north, every life in Winterfell would be at risk. He found a measure of comfort in routine. Over the next weeks, he sat in the Tower of the Hand, hearing petitions, dispatching letters, appointing new watch captains. He strove to keep the peace in King's Landing, peace could be maintained at a time of betrayal. Occasionally, he would glance out over the city's sprawl, watch the black smoke from countless chimneys, hear the distant shouts of dockworkers. He felt the weight of the Iron Throne pressing on him from afar. His only solace was the knowledge that Robert still breathed and had a formidable spirit. The king's men engaged Tywin's forces near the old stone watchtowers along the Gold Road. Reports of skirmishes, minor victories, and occasional setbacks arrived daily by Raven. Tywin Lannister, for his part, was too canny to engage Robert in a pitched battle. He probed and retreated, wearing down the king's patience. But Robert Baratheon, once roused, was not a man easily deterred. 2 months later, war thundered across the Riverlands. Jaime Lannister laid siege to Riverrun, trying to force the Tullys' surrender. Yet as the weeks drew on, Jaime found himself suddenly pressed by 2 approaching armies, one from the north under Robb Stark, and one under Robert Baratheon himself, who had left Tywin to stew behind him and marched with furious speed to relieve Riverrun. It was not long before rumors swept Westeros that Tywin, outmaneuvered, had retreated into the Westerlands, while Jaime was pinned in a vice. The lion did not intend to yield easily. For the first time in years, Robert Baratheon was in his true element in the field of battle, warhammer in hand. The king hammered at Jaime's lines until they cracked. Meanwhile, Robb Stark, fresh from a victory at the Whispering Wood, pinned Jaime's reserves. That day, by the Red Fork of the Trident, the Lannister host was torn asunder. Jaime Lannister himself, in a reckless attempt to break free, led a mounted charge aimed at Robert's center. For a moment, it looked as though the Kingslayer might succeed. But Sir Barristan Selmy and Sandor Clegane turned Jaime's cavalry, and in the melee, Jaime was unhorsed. Some say Jaime Lannister surrendered to the king in grudging silence. Others whispered that Robert gave Jaime a fearsome blow with his warhammer, dazing him to the brink of death. Either way, the Kingslayer's capture was a turning point. Once the battle ended, the king accepted the surrender of the remaining Lannister knights. The war, though not completely over, saw its fiercest conflict end on that blood-stained field. When word of Jaime's capture reached Tywin Lannister, the Lord of Casterly Rock supposedly turned white with fury, nearly choking on his wine. With Tywin forced into a humiliating retreat, the Baratheon Stark forces marched on. Father and son Robert and Robb did not stand as equals, but they fought side by side in the final push to free Riverrun. The Tully banners flew high as Edmure Tully greeted them. In gratitude, Mr. Tully, though gravely ill, gave blessings to the king. Elsewhere, the Northmen praised the swift justice that had come upon the realm's enemies. Many lords compared it to the days of Robert's rebellion when the stag and the wolf had stood victorious over the dragon. Now the stag and the wolf had bested the lion. Shackled in irons, Jaime Lannister was delivered to King Robert. The man's handsome face was bruised, and his expression was a mask of cold pride. When Robert confronted him about his crime's regicide, incest, treachery, Jaime only sneered. "I did what I had to do. You were too drunk on your hunts to see it." Robert's rage was immediate, but Ned stepped in. Ever the voice of conscience, Ned pressed for a proper trial. Robert retorted, "He did not offer my friend Rhaegar a trial, nor did he offer me that courtesy when he lay with my wife." But Ned gently reminded the king that they must not stain their victory with barbarity. The trial was not lengthy. The king's justice pronounced Jaime's guilt, listing the charges in a solemn, ringing voice. The Kingslayer had few defenders, and his only argument was an arrogant silence. He was thus sentenced to death in the presence of the lords of the Trident, the North, and the Stormlands. Some said Robert found a measure of grim satisfaction as he watched the sword descend, severing Jaime's golden head from his body. Others said the king looked haunted afterward, as though the final blow hammered away any illusions that this war could end cleanly. With Jaime dead and Tywin's forces battered, many lesser houses of the Westerlands surrendered. Tywin Lannister, the proud lord of Casterly Rock, still commanded fear but no longer had an army capable of standing against Robert's combined might. Messages flew between armies and keeps, and soon Tywin came forth under the banner of parley. He arrived at a neutral campsite on the banks of the Tumblestone, accompanied by a small retinue of Lannister bannermen. Robert Baratheon, flanked by Ned Stark, Barristan Selmy, and an honor guard of Stormland Knights, awaited him. The king, though wearing his heavy breastplate, still walked with a slight limp from the boar wound. Nonetheless, he stood tall, warhammer in hand, a silhouette of raw power. Tywin Lannister was resplendent in crimson and gold, but a keen observer could see the flickers of fatigue behind his pale green eyes. The lines of worry on his forehead betrayed the weight of recent defeats. The meeting was tense. Tywin demanded the release of Cersei and the children, claiming any dishonor belonged solely to Jaime, and that Cersei should be spared severe punishment. Robert refused to budge. "Your daughter cuckolded me," the king said, each word like a thunderclap. "She gave me false heirs, shattered my trust, and conspired against the crown. She is no innocent." Tywin's mouth was a thin line. "She is still the mother of your children in the eyes of the realm." Robert advanced a half step, anger turning his voice into a snarl. "They are not my children! They were fathered by that snake you raised, Jaime. Do not insult me by asking for mercy in that name." Ned tensed, glancing at the circle of Lannister guards behind Tywin. A single spark could ignite another battle. But to his surprise, Tywin lowered his gaze. He was outmaneuvered, outnumbered. "Then what do you propose as resolution?" Tywin asked. The king's terms were harsh. Cersei Lannister would remain in captivity until further notice. Joffrey Baratheon, being old enough to know right from wrong, would be taken north as a hostage to ensure Lannister compliance. Myrcella Baratheon would remain in King's Landing, also as a ward of the crown. Tommen Baratheon would travel with Stannis Baratheon to the Westerlands, ensuring House Lannister stayed loyal to the throne under Stannis' watchful eye. Tywin Lannister would surrender half his gold to pay for the crown's war expenses, and must reaffirm fealty to King Robert. No one doubted Tywin's fury as he listened to these demands. The Golden Lion of the Westerlands had been forced to kneel. Yet he had no army left to resist, and no alliances strong enough to break the crown's hold. Begrudgingly, Tywin bowed stiffly. The war ended at least for now. In the aftermath, the realms slowly realigned under King Robert's authority. Stannis Baratheon, summoned back from Dragonstone, was named Master of Ships, given that none questioned his skill at sea and his unyielding sense of duty. He was also assigned temporary governance over the Westerlands to keep Tywin in check. Renly Baratheon, ever eager for a taste of importance, struck a marriage alliance with House Tyrell. Margaery Tyrell would wed King Robert. In the original timeline, Renly had designs to marry Margaery himself, or see her wed to another. But here, it was Robert who would take a new Queen Anne arrangement that would strengthen the throne's position in the south and appease the Tyrells, who had so far remained aloof. Renly was pacified by receiving high court honors and a formal role in the small council. Now, free of Cersei's manipulations, Robert found renewed zeal for kingship. He had glimpsed the brink of death. He had tasted the bitterness of betrayal. Never again would he drink himself into oblivion and let the realm slip toward chaos. He began daily audiences, ensuring lords and peasants alike saw the king's face. He listened to counsel, especially Eddard Stark's, for the two men remained bound by years of unshakable friendship. The returning armies carried a sense of triumph, but also exhaustion. The Riverlands were ravaged, Some said it would take a decade to recover from the Lannister raids. The North, though spared the worst ravages of war, was forced to maintain a large standing force, uncertain if conflict might flare again. Nonetheless, many believed that House Stark's unwavering loyalty to the crown would ensure a stable future. In King's Landing, the mood was guardedly hopeful. With the Lannisters diminished, Petyr Baelish Littlefinger lost one of his biggest tools for political maneuvering, but remained a cunning presence on the small council. Varys the Spider still whispered through the walls, though no one could be sure of his ultimate goals. And though the court was not free of intrigue, it no longer festered under a queen's overshadowing corruption. Cersei, for her part, fumed in captivity. On multiple occasions, she demanded a formal audience with Robert, but each time her requests were refused. Joffrey, escorted to the north, sent furious letters that fell on deaf ears. Myrcella studied with Septas in King's Landing, a bright child overshadowed by her mother's misdeeds. Tommen, traveling with Stannis, was said to be the happiest of the three, finding mentors among Baratheon's knights who taught him values of discipline and martial skill. Justice, in Robert's eyes, had been served. House Lannister still existed, but it was no longer a lion with sharpened claws. The children, if they proved loyalty to the crown through deeds in time, might one day find a future of their own. If not, Robert would see that House Lannister forever remained a cautionary tale. Yet not all threats to the Seven Kingdoms came from within. Across the narrow sea, Daenerys Targaryen heard whispers that King Robert had not died after all. He was, in fact, alive and ascendant, cleaning out corruption in his own court. She also heard that his stance toward her assassination had reversed. Instead of sending knives, he had withdrawn them. For the first time in her short life, Daenerys felt a strange flicker of hope that maybe she could sail home one day without contending with cutthroats hired by the usurper. But home was complicated. She was still wed to Khal Drogo of the Dothraki, expecting a child, the stallion who mounts the world. Her brother Viserys had died ignominiously. She knew from ships that docked near Pentos that Westeros was embroiled in a Lannister rebellion. Now that Robert had crushed that rebellion, would he refocus on any Targaryen threat, or would he let her be? Daenerys found herself at a crossroads. But as the Dothraki war host pressed into Lazar and beyond, her questions about the Seven Kingdoms remained overshadowed by immediate survival. Khal Drogo's eyes looked westward, but not with immediate lust for conquest. For him, crossing the Salt Sea was a grand notion, but not a pressing cause. Whatever course Daenerys chose, it did not seem King Robert would send assassins for her any time soon. Some said the king no longer burned with Targaryen hatred, possibly softened by near death and a second chance at life. Others believed Robert's reprieve was temporary, contingent on Daenerys not stepping foot in Westeros. Either way, a new twist emerged in that old saga, leaving the door open for an uncertain future. When King Robert and Lord Eddard Stark returned to King's Landing after securing peace in the Riverlands, they were greeted with roaring cheers and undercurrents of tension. The populace, newly relieved that open war with the Lannisters had ended, still lived in fear of what fresh conflict might arise. Robert wasted little time with idle celebrations. He and Ned, working alongside the small council, orchestrated a grand plan for mending the realm. Reconstruction of the Riverlands. Funds seized from House Lannister helped rebuild roads, mills, and holdfasts burned by Gregor Clegane. Stabilizing crown finances. Littlefinger's cunning was harnessed to restructure debts and collect overdue tariffs. Lord Tywin's gold did not hurt either. Military readiness. With external threats uncertain, Robert kept a modest royal army stationed at Harrenhal and Moat Cailin, prepared to move against any new aggression. Marital alliances. Beyond Robert's upcoming union with Margaery Tyrell, Talk swirled of strategic matches for the king's new wards. Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen, though not Robert's children by blood, they were effectively wards to keep House Lannister in line. In keeping with Ned Stark's sense of honor, a quiet but sincere gesture was made. The king ordered that Myrcella and Tommen be well treated, given tutors, and allowed to mix with other noble youths under watchful eyes, of course. Joffrey, older and more spiteful, remained in the north, a deeply resented hostage. Yet there, under the watch of Robb Stark and Maester Luwin, Joffrey found a land where his princely temper won him few friends. Whether the cold discipline of the north would temper him was yet to be seen. Still, the realm breathed easier. With Cersei's hold on the king shattered and the rest of the Lannisters cowed, King's Landing was no longer a den of frantic conspiracies. Ned felt something almost like relief. His daughters were safer now, free to roam courtyards without fear of Lannister retaliation. Sansa missed the idealized Joffrey she once imagined, but under these new circumstances, she began to see life beyond illusions. Arya, for her part, trained daily in the Red Keep's yards, occasionally besting squires in friendly bouts, under the somewhat exasperated but fond eye of her father. And Robert? He committed himself to ruling with a vigor he had never shown since his rebellion against the Mad King. He woke earlier, heard petitions more carefully, and even participated in quiet council sessions with Stannis and Ned, forging a more robust code of laws. For many, it seemed the Seven Kingdoms had gained a second lease on life. Months turned to a year. Peace spread, though it remained an uneasy, bruised sort of peace. The realm's scars from warfare needed time to heal. Word of looming winter began to trickle from the citadel in Old Town, but no official declaration was made yet. Across the narrow sea, Daenerys Targaryen's path took her to Qarth after the death of Khal Drogo under different circumstances than the original timeline. She nurtured 3 mysterious dragon eggs in her possession gifts from Illyrio Mopatisand. Rumors swirled of a miraculous hatching. Sailors arriving in King's Landing carried tall tales of dragons reborn in the east. In response, the small council debated the threat. Some lords argued that dragons, if indeed real, could upend the realm. Ned insisted they should seek the truth first, relying on ravens from Essos or sending discreet envoys. Robert, in a new show of tempered judgment, refrained from screaming for Daenerys' head. Instead, he said, "If the Targaryen girl truly has dragons, we might all need to question the shape of the future." It was a statement that left the council in uneasy reflection. No one knew if a second dance of the dragons waited on the horizon, or if Daenerys might eventually find a place among them. At length, a hush fell over King's Landing in the deep hours of the night. The Red Keep's corridors lay quiet, with only the occasional footstep of a patrolling guard to break the stillness. In his private solar, Robert Baratheon drank from a goblet of water rather than wine. He looked out the high window across the glittering city and the darkened waters of Blackwater Bay. Behind him, Ned Stark stood, arms folded. "It's a different city at night," Robert murmured. "A different man stands before you, too." Ned answered softly, "You've come a long way, Robert. You nearly lost your life to that boar. But now, the realm stands stronger because you live." Robert snorted. "Stronger, perhaps. Still, I've executed men, put children in captivity, and begun bridging alliances through marriages as if people were pawns on a Cyvasse board. Is that strength or something else?" "Justice," Ned replied. "Necessary justice, if a bitter one." Silence lingered. They both knew the horrors that lurked beyond each horizon. Winter would come eventually, and the White Walkers were legends but never truly forgotten in the north. Threats overseas, the rise of new warlords. The realm was never free of danger. Yet for the moment, a sense of calm had settled. "I owe you my life, Ned." Robert's voice was thick with emotion. "Without your maester, I would have died and the realm with me." Ned bowed his head slightly. "You owe me nothing, your grace." "I only did what any friend would do." Robert turned, eyes dark with sincerity. "You did more. You saved the realm from the Lannisters' grip. You gave me a reason to live." He paused, then allowed the faintest grin. "And perhaps I'll even become a real king, no one that history might remember fondly instead of as the drunken fool who let the realm slip through his fingers." They exchanged a look of mutual respect. This was not the end of the story, far from it. The wars and intrigues of Westeros would only continue, each new turn of the wheel bringing fresh perils. But for once, Robert Baratheon was on his throne, very much alive, and determined to rule well. Where the realm went from here depended on the choices they all made. But in that silent chamber, with the candles flickering, King Robert and his hand stood united a stag and a direwolf, forging a new legacy together. Whispers of this pivotal twist in Westerosi history drifted across every port, keep, and crossroads inn. Singers began composing ballads about Robert's near-fatal hunt and Ned Stark's steadfast loyalty. The small folk gossiped of the humiliations dealt to House Lannister, the captivity of the Queen, and a king reawakened to duty.